In the last video, I showed you how to use fetch to go get data. We made this app right here. With this app, we went and fetched data from the GitHub API. So if we were to look for a user called jQuery, for example, we could do that and find all sorts of things. And so that's what we did in the last video. In this video, I want to talk about conditional rendering. And so what if sometimes we want to render something and sometimes we don't? If we take a look at this again, if we refresh, where are the results? Well, we haven't done a search, and so the results are missing. The reality is the ordered list right here in the component. That ordered list is actually there. If we dig in, we'll find it. There it is. That ordered list is there. I want to get rid of it. Whenever there are no results, I want that gone. Also, when we're in the middle of the Ajax call, it would be totally cool if we showed a loading spinner. That'd be pretty nifty. So we're going to do those two things with this application that we started building last time. All right, two things you need to realize about React and rendering that can make this actually pretty easy. First is this. If I create a variable, and I assign the value of null, I can take that and I can put that right here in the output. And nothing will happen. This is actually good. This is expected. This is wonderful. Because that means that if we have a variable with something with null in it, that means we can put it on the just put it in the output, but if it has something in it, it will actually be rendered. Like, for example, here's the second thing. And that is, you can take this line here where we're taking this HTML, this JSX, and we're putting it in this variable. We can take that and put that there in the render output, and there we go. That'll work. With that knowledge, we actually, I think, have what we need to start doing some of this rendering. Start doing some of this conditional rendering specifically. So let me delete that. So let's start with our first problem. I would like to not have this on the page at all whenever there is no data. And in fact, I want, instead of just not rendering, I want to put something in its place. I want to put a paragraph that says, hey, you should go search for stuff. Okay, so let's do that. How would we do it? So going with what we just know, just a second ago, what we just looked at, we can create a variable. And we can say, call it something like results. And then we can do a conditional. We can say if this.state.users.length is greater than 0. Now that means there are results. I can go in here and say, okay, if that's the case, then we will set results to that. So if we take that variable, put it in here, everything should work as normal. Well, it is a little different in that, look, the next button showed up here at the top. The reason why is the ordered list that was a block level element was stretching all the way across the screen. And so therefore that was making the next button go down to the bottom. You know what? We should totally make that next button conditionally rendered. We'll do that in a sec. But still, this actually worked. And so right now there's no results. And so therefore even the unordered list went away. And so now we can search for something like users named Barbie. Now that we actually have results, the list renders. It's fantastic. It works wonderfully. Now let's make this a little bit better and then put that message in. And so we can say results equals enter a search term above and click search. So now, at the very beginning, it gives you a message here. But if you search that message goes away and it is replaced by the actual list of items. So that's conditional rendering. You don't have to always put a value here. As you could see from how we worked through that, it was totally fine just putting null or even undefined right here. You can't return undefined from a component. That's bad. But you can put a value in there that's undefined, and it will actually work fine as well as null. Okay, so we've conditionally rendered that. That's cool. One thing that I would also like to do is put a loading spinner on the page if we're in the middle of an AJAX call. So let's figure out how we can do that. I think the first thing we need is a loading spinner. So I'm going to go to images and say loading spinner GIF. Let's see. That looks like one. All right, copy image address. Let's see what happens. Let's just put it in here. See if that works. There it is. Man, that's ugly. But, you know, it'll work. And so what I want to do is basically have this results bit have a three-way version of itself. There is the one where we have messaging, because they need to search. The other one is, of course, the results. And then there is the one that's in the intermediate state. And so if we want to be able to have that intermediate state, what we need to do is whenever someone clicks search to make an API call, it needs to change the state to say that we're in the middle of an API call. And then when we're done with the API call, it will change the state to say that we're done. So how would we do that? Well, let's go here in our make API call. This is our make API function that we made yesterday or last video, which did actually happen to be yesterday, at least in my life. So we've got this function here. Whenever we start to make the API call, what I want to do is I want to put a new key in. Well, let's put the new key in here. So is making AJAX call false. So that's the default state. When we're about to start making that, I'm going to say this dot set state is making AJAX call true. And then whenever we're done, we actually have results is making AJAX call false. So we're setting it to true whenever we're starting and then setting it to false whenever we're done. Okay, so if that's the case, how do we turn this into a tripartite, a three-way conditional? Well, we can do just a boring if, else if, and else. Let's just do it that way. So once again, let results there at first. Our first condition, if this dot state dot is making AJAX call. If that's true, then we're going to go the route of putting that image in, like so. Next, our previous condition, if we're not in the middle of making an AJAX call, check to see if there's users. If there are users, then we will display the list. If there are not, we will put the messaging. Let's see how this goes. Okay, it showed up there for a second. Let's go back to Barbie. All right, so that is actually working. If we want to, we can slow that down so we can see it by doing something like a set timeout. And so if I want to just wait for a bit, I could do this whole fetch on a set timeout. It'll actually just be slightly more convenient for me to do this. Just put this here for a sec. So the API call is going to fire immediately, or at least as fast as the browser can fire it after this point. But whenever the results come back, I'm going to wait a full 3 seconds to actually turn that AJAX called Boolean to false. So let's do this and say transformers. A long wait. Now, from a design standpoint, that's pretty hideous. Let's just look for Megatron again. You know, we need this to be below this search widget. So let's go deal with that basic styling there. Below the search widget. Well, if we look here, we can see that this is here, and well, these are basically going to be inline. All of this stuff is actually going to be inline. And so let's solve that by wrapping this in a div. We can give it a class if we want to. In this case, I'm just going to go with that. And that's going to put it one on top of the other. So let's just search for search. There it is, waiting a few seconds, and then the results come back. It is, of course, now gone. Okay, we have accomplished what we set out to do. So I'm going to get rid of that set timeout because we actually don't want to enforce lag on our users. So that would be wrong. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I don't want this next button to show up whenever there are no search results on the page, because that doesn't make any sense. So we can actually do a similar thing. I can create another variable. It really is this easy. Paging. So now I will only set that button to that variable, and then so that should only show up now when there's actually data. Look, there's no data. Now there's paging, and that works just fine. Okay, cool. Now this makes our rendering a lot more complicated. This would actually be a great time to pull this stuff into a separate component, because I mean, it does definitely makes this rendering a whole lot more complicated to have all of this conditional stuff up here. Now this is pretty clean in here, but this stuff, it's stuff you got to read through and reason through the conditions and all that kind of stuff. So let's do something cool and actually extract all of this into a separate component. Let's create one. Create a component called search results first. We'll do search results and then we'll actually do the paging. So new file, or should we say search results? I'll say search results display. Okay, so we've created search results display. Let's import it. Now let's get it in the page. I'll just put it right here for now. And then we'll refactor this component to pull the stuff that is needed into the other component. So there's the hi from search results display. We've correctly created the component and imported in, and so all that's good. Now what we want to do is do the refactor. So I'm going to want to separate out the paging for a bit, because I'd actually kind of like this paging to be a separate component all by itself. We could do it as if it was embedded in the search results component itself, or we could keep it separate right here. It doesn't really matter what I want to do. In this case, it would matter in a real application, because that would determine how you wanted to organize your application, and that is actually very important. In this case, I don't really think it matters. And so for cleanliness sake, I think right now I'm just going to have this just as a separate component, so I can just deal with the results as it is right now. Now, in terms of the results, what pieces of data do we need? That's the question we need to ask. If we're going to take this entire block with the exception of the paging, what pieces of data do we need? Well, let's see. This depends on the is making Ajax call from state. So we're going to need that. We're going to need to pass that into the component as a prop. There it is. Cool. And then we need the users, obviously. Since we're going to do this in a different component, we don't need to worry about that. So let's take users in. If you're dealing with components here and you're line wrapping and you find that annoying, you can do this. This actually works fine. Alright, so search results display is going to go there. So if we have all of those bits of data, we can get rid of that variable. We can get rid of that variable. And we're using that variable, I guess I should say. And we can take all of this, and basically we'll start by copying this and putting it in here. Now, since our output in this particular case is always going to be either this right here, this, or this, we can actually get away from using this variable at all. And we can just say if this dot props dot is making Ajax call, then return the image. However, if that's not the case, if this dot props dot users dot length props, then we can just return OL. And then if we're in the blank scenario, we can return that. So I think that will essentially work. Let's go find out. So we're already passing in our data. I really only need this line in a minute. Let's comment that out. All right, so let's check our display. Oh, you know what? I took out that variable and I didn't get rid of it here. There we go. All right, the messaging seems to be working. Let's see if we will briefly see that loading spinner. We do, and then there's results. Excellent. So all that worked as expected. We can now do the same thing with paging, and just for the sake of time, I'm not going to create another component. Actually, in this case, since it is a one-liner here, we can do this. We can say let paging, actually it'll be two lines. If, okay, 3 lines. If this dot state dot users is the name of the, yes. If this dot state dot users dot length is greater than 0. Okay, I can't count. It's 4 lines with curly brackets. And then there's the paging button, which actually works just fine. Okay, I think that's good enough for now. So that's the basic idea around conditional rendering and conditional components. You can put variables in the page, in the output, it's totally fine. If that is undefined or null, it's totally cool. It's fine, it'll be great, it'll work just great, wonderful. But if you put something in it, it will get rendered out. Let me do one other thing. I want to show you an error, because this is going to be a common error. And that is if you are in the situation where you forget to actually assign this variable. Because I've actually made the same error recently, and so have some of my students. Here we go. Let's see. Expected an assignment or function call, and instead saw an expression. Well, where is that? Line 59 in app.js. This is app.js. Line 59. That's this. And so if you see that error, that may be the cause right there. Okay, that's it for conditional rendering this time.